Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm going to get started right away. We have two speakers with us today, and we're going to take up just a touch more time. So I'm going to do my best to run through this introduction as quickly as possible. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Haley Roth, and I work with the Columbia Mountains Institute, or CMI for short. And I'm joined here today by Marcy Marr and Kennel Benish with KCP, the Kootenai Conservation Program. And we're here to present CMI's Cred Talks, the Columbia Region Ecological Discussions, and KCP's Winter Webinar Series. Now, before we dive in, let's just take a moment and acknowledge that the land in which both of our organizations work is in the unceded homeland of the Sinixt, the Shuswap, the Ktunaxa, and the Syilx Okanagan peoples, who have stewarded and cared for this land, water, and all living things since time immemorial. Now, as we've been doing in this series, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself via the chat, share who you are, perhaps who you're working with, and also share with us the Indigenous territories that you're zooming in from today. And while that starts to populate in the chat, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce the series. Okay, so we're exploring the theme of wildlife corridors and ecological connectivity. We're welcoming 8 speakers who will discuss this theme from different perspectives and provide a wide view that can inform the conservation of connected and resilient landscapes in the Columbia Basin. This series is financially supported by the Columbia Basin Trust and LGL Limited. Many thanks to these organizations who could not offer this series free of charge without their help. Thanks also, of course, to all of you who are tuning into what is the 7th webinar in this series, where we have Dr. Michelle McLellan and Dr. Lana Ciarnello, who will examine the success of coexistence strategies in an agricultural community that is critical to the recovery of southwestern BC's 5 threatened grizzly bear populations, the Pemberton Meadows. They will discuss models that they have developed to predict connectivity among core habitat populations and on-site evaluations to identify corridors allowing bears to move naturally across the meadow. And they will explain how the corridor design was supported by the proactive bear smart management, the critical role that social carrying capacity plays in grizzly bear recovery, and the importance of preventing or resolving conflicts before resident tolerance for bears decreases. Okay, so now what I would like to do is just tell you briefly about one of your hosts, CMI. So CMI is a nonprofit and an association for people working in the various fields of ecology. And what we do is provide professional development opportunities in the form of conferences, courses, webinars, like this, of course, on everything from skill-based research techniques to more sort of complex land management conundrums. Our website is a really great place to learn more about what we do, and it contains a bunch of really fantastic resources, such as proceeding documents from all of our large events and recordings from talks like this, of course. So now what I would like to do is pass it off to Marcy Marr, who will tell us a bit about KCP.
Thanks, Haley. Hello, everyone. I'm Marcy Marr, and I'm joining you on behalf of the Kootenai Conservation Program, or KCP. And we're a diverse network of more than 85 land and water conservation and stewardship groups, federal, provincial, and local governments, First Nations, land trusts, agricultural producers, and educational institutions who all contribute to conserving our region. The purpose of KCP's partnership is to cooperatively conserve and steward landscapes, to sustain biodiversity and naturally functioning ecosystems, and to generate the support and resources needed to advance this effort, including building technical knowledge in webinars like this. We are very excited to be hosting this webinar series again with CMI and would like to give an additional thanks to our program sponsors, without whom we'd not be able to support this type of work. So now just a couple of housekeeping details and we'll get started. So this webinar is being recorded and will be posted within a week to both CMI's event webpage and also KCP's Winter Webinar Series webpage. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentations. So please use the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbar to add a question to the queue, and we'll do our best to make our way through them. You can also use the upvote button in the Q&A. So if you see a question that's similar to yours, or that you'd also like to see answered, please press the thumbs up icon by that question. And as Haley said, given that we have 2 speakers today, we may go over time a bit and the presenters can stay on. So if you can too, please continue being with us today. Okay, Haley, back to you.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, so now I have the opportunity of introducing both of our speakers, and I'm going to read both of their bios together right now. So we have Dr. Michelle McLellan, whose main research and interest is in studying population dynamics of recovering threatened large mammal populations. She works with the Wildlife Science Center to understand the implications of policy and recovery actions on populations and predator-prey dynamics. She also supports the Okanagan Nation Alliance in their efforts to restore ecosystems and connectivity on their territory. And prior to this work, she was the co-director of the Southwest Busy I am really stumbling over my words today. The co-director of the Southwest BC Grizzly Bear Project, focusing on population recovery, habitat selection, and interpopulation connectivity. So Michelle has recently sustained a concussion, and I'll just let you know that her presentation is going to be pre-recorded so that she's as present as possible for the Q&A. Now, before we start that, I'm just going to read Lana's bio as well. So Dr. Lana Ciarnello is an independent scientist who has conducted research on American black bears and grizzly bears since 1993. She is currently the principal investigator for the Orphan Grizzly Bear Rewilding Project, which is the only rehabilitation and release program for the grizzly bears in North America. Lana believes in science-based management of bears to support human-bear coexistence. Her research interests focus on the interaction of humans and bears, and particularly related to urban expansion and the recovery of listed populations. All right, so what we're going to do now is dive right into Michelle's presentation.
Hello, thank you again for letting me pre-record this part of the session. I know it's not ideal, but I think it will enable me to be able to answer your questions at the end of the presentation as a result. Lana and I would like to share with you some of our experiences in understanding what recovering grizzly bear populations in BC looks like. I'll start at the broadest scales, outlining how we've come to where we are. And Lana will describe what the tools are for coexistence at the more local scale, where we implement action towards sharing space with other species. So it's starting about 170 years ago. Grizzly bears ranged across a much broader part of North America than they do today. We're looking at the area in this brown color here. This is where grizzly bears used to be throughout the Midwest of the United States, on the Rocky Mountains and Sierra Nevadas. And about by the 1920s, after settlers began moving across the US and North America in greater and greater numbers, bringing with them guns and an idea of persecuting most predators and removing them from the landscape, basically they killed everyone they encountered, along with other species, driving decline of white-tailed deer and things as well. But generally speaking, by the 1920s, there were very few little pockets of grizzly bears left in Utah and in Colorado. And today we're left with this blue-green, the color represented by the blue-green, mostly coming down the Rocky Mountains and with isolated populations in Yellowstone here, and then along the South Coast Mountains in British Columbia and potentially into the North Cascades in Washington, although that's been several years since anyone's seen a grizzly bear there. So we're going to be focusing on this area along the peninsula of occupancy that kind of comes down along the coast mountains. There hasn't been nearly as much research in this area. But at the time of this beginning of this study that I'll present to you, there had been at least 32 studies in the Rocky Mountain ranges and hundreds of papers written and thousands of bears radio collared. And by comparison, there were only about three studies with about 30 individuals monitored in the coast mountain range. So at the beginning of this, there was some information, but it was scattered and definitely not comprehensive. So zooming in, just for a bit of background, these populations that we're looking at is in this area here. This is how they've been ranked more recently for conservation ranking in British Columbia. And we see that these three populations down here are of extreme concern with the high probability of becoming extinct or already extirpated and with limited connectivity. So these rankings are based on the degree of threats, population size, degree of connectivity, and so here again, we'll be focusing on this bottom here. So moving in, so I've changed the colors here. So what was red in the high threat, extreme concern, is now yellow. So in the North Cascades, Steinahadlatch, and Garibaldi Pit. And these are adjacent to the Squamish Lillooet population, the Selchocotan Ranges. Now, if you're not familiar with the area, this is Vancouver here, several million people living in this area here. The Fraser River separates the Steinahadlatch from the North Cascades. And then this is the Howe Sound in Squamish and the Cheakamus and up to Whistler. So this is Highway 99 now goes through this way and receives some of the highest traffic volume of any highway in BC. So in the mid 1990s, there was suspicions that, and grizzly bear hunting had been stopped in the 70s in Squamish Lillooet in the year 2000 in the Selchocotan Ranges and Steinahadlatch. And there wasn't really a great idea of how many grizzly bears there were in the area. There was a lot of land use planning going on in that time, and group of biologists, government biologists, and Okanagan Nation in Lillooet decided that it was a good idea to inventory grizzly bears in the area, across the whole area, and as well as looking at individuals in some of these areas to understand what was driving their populations there. So to begin this, Clayton Apps, and along with Bruce McLellan, Tony Hamilton, Steve Rashetta, did a region-wide, with help by Bateman, did a region-wide DNA mark recapture program between 2004 2008, and they were using genetic tagging from hair samples on hair corrals that I talked to you before about across this whole area, not this North Cascades, but all these other population units. And they were looking for population size and degree of connectivity. And what they found was that there were a lot fewer bears in the Steinahadlatch than they had anticipated. They had expected about 60. Instead, the population was small at about 23 individuals estimated from the mark recapture program. They had 0 detections in the Garibaldi Pit. There have since been a few bears feeding in the Pit River on salmon, but very few in number. And then the Squamish Lillooet had some bears, but was genetically connected to the Toba Butte and the Selchocotan Ranges. And this area had, several hundred overall, and were connected northward to the contiguous population that we saw in the first map. So the population was relatively large up here, but there was some signs of historic genetic isolation along these valley bottoms. This is the Pemberton Meadows that Lana will be talking to you about more deeply. And then this is the down part of the reservoir. So this is the Bridge River, where there used to be a large salmon run up into this upper reaches here, but now it's been dammed. And then here, this area is flanked by large lakes and human settlement, and then the Fraser Canyon on this side. So following that initial population sample, we both did a coloring program. I was hired as a field tech at that time with my only skills of tracking bears and not getting motion sickness, flying to find them. And we began and then in 2010, we continued doing a DNA monitoring program in a subset of the population. So in this lower part of the Selchocotan and the Steinahadlatch, to try to understand whether there were changes and what the difference was, like why were there so many more bears here and so few here, and some of the genetic differences between them. So we found that the Selchocotan population looked like it was recovering. Populations were growing, cub survival was high, female survival was high. In comparison, the Steinahadlatch population was roughly 1/3 the density of the Selchocotan, and cub survival was low, natural mortality was high, and there were a few instances of human-caused mortality. But because this population was so small, sample sizes were small, so drawing really strong inferences is a bit challenging, given that this photo was taken at a water hole in the Selchocotan population unit. So the first DNA monitoring or region-wide sampling of the whole area, and then our subsequent population monitoring identified the several population fractures. So we have the one that between the Squamish Lillooet and Garibaldi Pit following Highway 99. Now there wasn't a resident bear population in the Garibaldi Pit, so it's a fracture along there, and it seemed as though this was the boundary to that. No bears were detected on this side. And then there was a population fracture between Pemberton and Darcy, and as we'll see later, that this differentiation had quite a strong genetic signal, in that suggesting that it had been separated from many generations. And what's more is we found that along Highway 99 was also a fracture for female grizzly bears that were pretty much only located in this lower part of the Sinixt. There were no females detected in the 15 years of this study in between these two. So the fracture for males, one male had moved across north and become a breeder in the Syilx area. But at the time of this study, there were no bears from elsewhere that had come into this time and reproduced. So this fracture was a sort of like a boundary, not so much a genetic fracture, but a movement barrier to bears across the Pemberton Meadows in this area. So here, just reiterate, we had some genetic connectivity in between these population units and a lot in the north. There was more limited movement across this part of the Squamish Silhouette, and then what we call the McGillivray Mountains in this area and the rest of the Syilx across the Downton River. And then there were none between the Sinixt and Syilx and the Garibaldi Pit and Squamish Silhouette. So this, and then limited movement here. Sorry. This is the area of focus. This is the area that we need to pay attention to in our first steps of reconnecting populations, of moving towards connectivity in this area. This is, with the absence of connection here, this is how extirpation continues. These small isolated populations, like the North Cascades before it, become so small that they can't sustain themselves and are more subject to small population effects, Lee effects, and stochastics, and sensitivity to stochastic events, random events. And so we have to focus on this. Otherwise, the range continues to contract. Despite the bears that we're seeing more commonly in the valleys and elsewhere in BC, this is how populations decline and range contract over time. So simultaneously to the DNA monitoring program, we had a GPS collaring program that started in 2005. And the objectives of this study were to monitor survival and reproduction of individuals within these populations to identify the differences, if any, among areas. And then we also followed a lot of these collared bears around daily to find out what was driving their populations, what their food sources were, where they ate, what habitats they used, and how they died. And so this program went on for many years, and we learned a lot about what the habitat use bears were in this area. So, and from this, you can get a lot of information from bears by following them. One of which is their home ranges. And so these are just female home ranges, and this is just to highlight how bears generally use this space in and around these fractures. So each one of these little blobs is a rabid female home range that was monitored for over a year. So we have a good idea. Some of them were monitored for many years. So we have a good idea of what their space use looked like. So here we see that on the north in the McGillivray Mountains area, there were many females, many of them related with overlapping home ranges, and they were mostly feeding on cockleberries in the summer and amalanche or Saskatoon berries, glacier lilies, and that was the bulk of their diets. But their home ranges did kind of go up to and next to the Pemberton Meadows, but few of them used the valley bottom, and even fewer crossed. The same in the Squamish Silhouette population area here. This is from Steve Rochetta's study, and he had several females collared there for a long period of time, and likewise, the concentration of their use went up into the Ryan Valley and Meager Creek, but not so much across into two. Like when you get to the Upper Lillooet, there's much more remote. There's no human settlement, and movement is a little bit more fluid, but along these areas where there's human settlement, it was limited. In addition to human settlement, I'll talk for, and then the Sinixt female. So here we have a few females that were collared in this area. We stopped collaring in 2014 because of the small population size, and we were confident we could continue to monitor them just via genetics because they were so easily detected. But here we had the females that were up into Highway 99, but not crossing. So there was this area used by males, or females, but not by females in between. And female grizzly bears are usually highly phylopatric, so they don't move far from their mother's home range, most commonly. Some do. It's much more rare for them to move away from the mother's home range. So re-establishing connectivity by females across this area will be, and has been, a very slow process. We have seen very little change in the last 20 years, but we're hopeful that with the right protections in the core habitat areas and work on the connectivity work, that might happen. Also, Cheryl Blair, Sakawash biologist in Lillooet, she's working on monitoring and leading some restoration work and habitat security work for the Sinixt bears. Likewise, the Okanagan Nation is working hard towards developing some protected areas and hopefully to ensure connectivity across this area as well. So in addition to the human caused barriers to connectivity, there's a lot of geographic limitations. Like this is Anderson Lake, which is right here. It's a very long lake, steep, rugged mountains on either side, a road with sparse communities along the edge, rocky, marginal habitat. So it's not really ideal for crossing. It limits, the natural berries are limited as well. So it's another obstacle to overcome. So this is just to highlight some of the things we found about how isolated they are. So this is the kind of a metric of genetic difference between the populations. So it highlights how related these populations are to each other. So here we have the Sinixt, the McGillivray, which is part of the South Tocone, and then the Upper Lillooet. And we see that from this information that the sign is quite different, is quite separate from, has been for many generations, from the neighboring populations, almost as much as the island populations in Alaska. So these populations have been separate for a long time. There's a high incidence of homozygosity, and the pedigree over the long-term monitoring shows, genetic monitoring shows that most bears are the product of full sibling mating or parent offspring mating. There's a really high incidence of inbreeding. Like I said before, it's difficult to draw any strong inferences from such a small population, but we did see reduced juvenile survival, reduced adult fertility, delayed primiparity. Female bears were not having their first litter into 12 or more. However, litter size did remain sort of comparable to other populations. So that was the difference there. But in general, we see that these three, out of the most adjacent populations to the Stein, it appears that there is a long time separation between populations. So moving forward, to understand the causes of population fragmentation, obviously historic mortality and the history of an area, the geography, all plays a role. So what we see now is a legacy of what came before. And in a lot of places it's maintained by current mortality, current barriers to connectivity, and then also lost and degraded habitat. Like this is the Pemberton Meadows. Obviously now it's a beautiful farmland. However, in the past it was probably more cottonwood swales and patches of low elevation spring habitat that no doubt grizzly bears used in the past. But now it's mostly inhabited by farmers, and it is also used more and more increasingly by bears. Lana will bring you more information on that. But the history of the area, if you're not familiar with it, is that Vancouver, it has 2 million people, and currently, but in the 1858 was the beginning of the Fraser River Gold Rush, and before that time, the area was mostly settled by indigenous people. There were communities all along the salmon-bearing streams, Lillooet, Lytton, Lost Bar, and all of these Shalaf and Aquaqua, and people here lived near and with the salmon most predominantly, and so. But once they discovered gold in the Upper Fraser River, that went from thousands maybe of people to tens of thousands within months and a year. So it brought huge changes, quick changes, lots of guns, incentivized people to continue the predator control and predator reduction, and in the area, basically persecution. So from Vancouver up the Fraser River, there was these paddle wheeler boats that went up to the Harrison Lake, and then they built like a track for horses, carts, and people to go up, and then another boat up the Lillooet River, and another cart trail over up the Birkenhead to Anderson and Seton Lake. So this became the mode of transport for thousands of people. Along with it came settlements, quickly erupting settlements, and also the trail up the Fraser Canyon on the other side. So this is, as we see, this is completely surrounding the Sinixt population. And also pointing out, like the Fraser Canyon is likely a barrier for many females just on its own. It's very rugged, dry terrain, but coupled with rapid human development and increased mortality, it becomes more so. Fast forward through time, in the 1880, I think this was the railway, I can't remember the details, but either way, it brought people. There was a track put through the Cheakamus into Alta Lake, where Whistler is now today, and a community post was built there by settler community, and then also in Pemberton Meadows. That became an agricultural place almost as soon as it was settled, and bringing people up in more and more numbers through this pathway here. Today, millions of visitors visit Whistler every year and the area around. Not entirely sure how this relates to connectivity. However, we do know that the increased use of people complicates things and may restrict reestablishment of bears in the area, or grizzly bears in the area. I mean, today we get black bears and mountain bikers, and hikers, and everybody all mixed up and together in the Whistler area. It's a busy place. It has, thousands and thousands of people a day. And in the late 90s, or in the early 90s, the Duffy Lake Road was paved through between Mount Currie and Lillooet. And I remember when this happened, but up until then, it was just a dirt road. And then that was put in the 60s and was seldom used by anyone. So these changes have definitely brought an impact and influx of people into the area. I think some of the legacy of where we see the females and the lack of bears is coupled between geography and a long legacy of bear mortality. So to have long-term coexistence, we need population connectivity. And for grizzly bears, this needs to be long-term. They're slow reproducing species. Females don't disperse far. So there needs to be work in the valley bottoms to reconnect populations. And increasing population resilience comes with building population connectivity. They can withstand a little bit more mortality in that way. And it's required to maintain their current range or grow or reconnect to the range that they once had in these mountains, and then maintain this function of individuals moving out so you have genetic health. Wrong way, apologies. So now this is a bit of a modeling exercise. I'll try to go quickly because I don't want to bore you to death, but using the grizzly bear locations that we got that then downloaded them via fixed wing. So this is kind of an area, this is Anderson-Seton Lake. Here you can see, we use these these GPS locations to build habitat selection models, which relate bear location use to GIS maps, things like climate and land cover, disturbance regimes, fire, forest harvest, and those things. And using that, we found patches of core habitat areas and then the least cost paths between them. So grizzly bears tend to use patches of food for a time and during the seasonal patches of food and then move between them. So their home ranges usually consist of lots of patches, and then they move between them. So this is, although it's a modeling exercise, it is somewhat reflective of the way that bears use the landscape. And so we looked at where these core habitat areas are, and then other factors that would resist their movement between them, either poor habitat, crazy geography, big lakes, roads, human settlement, and using these two layers, we built areas where we thought there'd be linkage between them or where we could secure and develop linkage between them. So this is the spring model. So this was the model that we used to predict how they would move. Bears in the spring in this area so far tend to focus on avalanche shoots. They're abundant. They have lots of glacier lilies and other food sources that the bears focus on at that time of year. And then, so first we use locations from the spring to identify where good habitat quality was. And so these are often just in the valley bottoms. Obviously the Pemberton ice fields here doesn't have a lot of glacier lilies, but it's not so much barrier connected. But we had identified these habitat areas for movement. And then we also used other seasons to combine with spring for core habitat areas, which are essentially clusters of high quality habitat or big patches of high quality habitat that are used by a lot of bears. For example, this patch here is the Tankwell huckleberry field. It is a burn from the 90s, and at one time it had 16 grizzly bears using it that we detected in one DNA site, and the most huckleberries we've ever seen. And so, and this area is right adjacent to the Pemberton Meadows. So it is the cornerstone of a lot of those female home ranges that we saw before. Likewise, there's another one up here. So these are all spring habitat. So there's these patches, large patches of high quality habitat that form the nodes between which we want to connect. And then there's the resistance. So this is the Pemberton Valley. This is apparently the most expensive house ever sold there. And then with this human infrastructure sometimes comes the attractants of these fancy chickens. So these are all the houses, these black triangles here are all the houses that in human residences and settlement and infrastructure that may form barriers to bears moving across the area or also mortality sink. So using the habitat and then the houses, we get this idea of how they're likely to flow through. So here you get a bit limited movement where there's lots of people because they're a barrier to activity. But we see that some slots, despite this, will still have a likelihood of bears moving through it. And so the north end of the Pemberton Meadows, partway down, Solana will be focusing on this area to look at how we take this broad scale picture of connectivity in a whole area and bring it down to the small area where mortality happens and where connectivity happens in the individual lifespan of a bear. So here's kind of a 3D Google Earth view of the Pemberton Valley, Pemberton Meadows, and grizzly bear locations in the area. So basically, we're trying to figure out where they're going to cross, where they're going to use the valley to reconnect, and if so, will they survive? Thank you so much for listening to my part of the presentation. I'm really sorry that I had to do it this way, but hopefully I'll be able to answer some of your questions for it, and I'll pass it over to Lana. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that. Lana, while I talk for a moment here, you can take over the screen share. Michelle, I just want to say thank you to rising to the occasion and pre-recording to make sure that you could still present today. And everyone, I just want to let you know that Although she may not have sounded like she was recovering from a concussion, it's because we sped the video slightly. So she is speaking a little bit faster than her normal cadence for those of you who know her. Lana, I'll pass it over to you. Your screen share looks great.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. And I thank Michelle for that wonderful introduction, and upon all which the science on which this work is that I'm going to present is based. So let's talk about some boots on the ground. It was in 2019 that the Coast to Cascades Grizzly Bear Recovery Initiative came to me and said, we've been doing research in this area, supporting research in this area that's been done, and the bears are starting to recover. They're coming back, and we have this area, Pemberton Meadows, like Michelle just said, it's less of a barrier than some of those other areas, and the bears are really going to come back in here. We need to support coexistence. What does that look like? What can we do? Okay, so they're looking at reversing the decline of grizzly bears throughout this whole southwestern BC, and looking at Pemberton Meadows because those bears are growing as this type of what we call in biology demographic rescue, supporting these bears so that they come out and naturally augment what's going on. And this is not alone. This is in partnership. This is on the territory of the Okanagan Nation, First Nation. Also, you saw some local and provincial government research being done in there. And of course, you have the residents of Pemberton Meadows. So what I did first off is I said, okay, well, I kind of need to know what's going on in this area. I'm new sort of coming into it. So I thought I'm going to go to the Conservation Officer Service and request what at that time was called the Problem Wildlife Occurrence Reports, and now called the Human Wildlife. So I requested them for 15 years for Pemberton Meadows. And what did I find? I found that after I removed all the repeat entries, I did this, there were 46 reports of bears. It's only about 3 reports a year. But of all those reports, only 3 of them were grizzly bears. So in 15 years, they had 3 calls that were in their database anyway. So one was in with chickens in 2007, just a sighting in 2011, and a calf killed in 2017. So this doesn't really give me much to go on here. So I firm back to the premise of our BC Bear Smart program. It's a great program. It's a proactive program. What it does is looks at how can we get ahead of what's going on before things happen? How can we stop the creation of problems, human-bear conflicts? But what it does that's really great is it acknowledges that each community, everywhere we are, is completely unique in their conflicts that occur, okay? So it doesn't take some blanket approach where it's just like bears are in garbage, do this. No, it's each community is unique. What's going on in this community? So the first thing you do is you conduct what's called a bear hazard assessment. Based on that bear hazard assessment, what you find, you come up with a management plan. Okay, so what is a hazard assessment, right? Well, it's like I said, it's a community specific profile. It's specific to that area, and in this case, to Pemberton Meadows, right? But it doesn't represent your hazard of encountering a bear, not at all. Yeah, it's not about you humans anymore. It's about the bear. It is, what is the probability of this little dude who's trying to have safe passage across this road becoming this big guy who's feeding on this in someone's backyard, just happens to be garbage. It doesn't represent the probability of encountering a bear. It represents the likelihood of this little bear growing up to be what we consider a problem or conflict animal, okay? So how am I going to do that for the meadows, right? I've got 3 occurrence reports in 15 years. That's not going to work. Well, I got to go there. So I got to go there and I got to come up with a survey that I can give the residents and ask them what's going on. And particularly because, as you see down here, I have an image from 2016. Of those 3 reports, none of them were from 2016. So this never showed up in the Conservation Officer Service database. It wasn't there. But clearly, this is a grizzly bear feeding on a cow carcass, right? So I need to talk to the residents and see what's going on. So we take a look at Pemberton Meadows when I'm on the ground, and I see this beautiful area. Here's Tenquel Mountain. Do you remember Michelle talked about 16 grizzly bears in a huckleberry burn there, right? And it feeds nice down here to this beautiful lake. It's just little, it's called Oxbow Lake. It's very rich, it has everything grizzly bears love. And then we see that this is all settled. These are big farms and farmland. It's an agricultural based community. Due to that, there's going to be restrictions. There's restrictions on land use due to its location within the agricultural land reserve, okay? Now, what does it focus on? It focuses on bovine livestock. It focuses on our potatoes, where we get our potatoes here, grains, carrots. They're a grizzly bear's favorite food. Hay. Oh, he doesn't love some lush spring grass coming up, right? So those are the kind of things that are going on in this agricultural-based community, right? But you have it surrounded by this high quality bear habitat. And it was in its day high quality bear habitat, right? Here's Tenquel Mountain. Look at the glacier lily bulbs, right? This is a grizzly bear's favorite food. Look like little garlic bulbs here. They dig up the whole slopes. Come down here to Oxbow Lake, like I was talking about, just showing you what it looks like. You have high quality habitat coming down into this meadow area. So like I said, I developed a survey and I administered, and here's 16, doesn't seem like a lot of respondents, but when you're dealing with huge farmlands and you're also dealing with farmers that are managing multiple lands, they're answering for that whole area in there. So this actually covered pretty much really well the mid to upper meadows, okay? Everybody reported black bears. We all have black bears on our property. They said, yep, they're there, followed by coyotes, and surprisingly, grizzly bears is ranking third. 11 of the respondents out of the 16 have grizzly bears on their property, okay? But they're, like we know from the reports, they're not reporting them, right? So I asked them, oh, that's interesting, right? I just want to see if I skipped a slide there. Nope, it does go to this one next, okay. So when I asked them about how are they using your property, so what's going on, right? Because we got 19% no use, and then we've got low use for 69%. They're using it really, really low, walking through the backs, maybe feeding on a little bit of grass or sedge, that kind of thing, right? Only one respondent is reporting that high use of their property. I say, well, when are you seeing them, right? Well, by far, the majority we're seeing them is in the fall, right? Followed by the spring, right? But we've got nothing in the winter. The spring and fall season is just one person, and the all seasons except winter is just one person. So, well, what do you think is attracting them to your property? So most people have nothing. We don't have anything that's attracting them to our property. Nothing's attracting them there, right? Okay, well, we have carrots, that's ranking number 2, and some compost. No garbage at all. There's no issues with garbage. These are farmers that have been in this area for a while. They know garbage is going to be a problem. It's going to make a problem there. It's going to give us a headache. They are well above that. All the garbage is secure in here. This is not, I never found one can I needed to worry about. No issues with garbage. It's all these attractants, though, okay? They're just coming through. So now I need to know, okay, well, what do they think about bears? Because if bears are going to be coming back, I kind of need to know, do you want them back? Do you not want them back? Because some people, they want to kiss bears. And other people, they're scared to death of them. You have that whole range of spectrums in between going on in there. But it's critical in recovery, right? Is what we think about these bears. What do we want them? So I asked them, are there negative economic impacts to having wildlife on your property? And 56% of the respondents reported that there were indeed negative economic impacts. That's interesting. Oops, got to hit next. And their monetary loss they were reporting ranged from nothing. They just simply seen them. They're eating some grass, not a big deal. Or they're in my barley field. It's, a couple $100, that kind of thing, right? Up to greater than 10,000. That's when cattle are lost, okay? So I say to them, okay, so it's having a negative and economic impact, but what do they think about wildlife? And you'll see here, when I ask them, is it economically good for me? You've got this whole range of, green, neutral. So why are you doing it? He said, well, 69% of them said, well, conserving wildlife is the right thing to do. That's what we should be doing, right? And I said, well, is it an important part of being a good neighbor? And 62.5%, yeah, it's an important part of being a good neighbor, right? And then half of them, and if you combine this with strongly agree and agree, that's going to be 75% of them said it's a high priority for me. So I just feel, I'm farming this land. It's a high priority to have wildlife as well. Okay? So this is pretty good. I'm thinking this is pretty great, right? People are wanting them to come back. So now, okay, so if we want these bears to be in the area, how do we get them in the area, but move them through? So like we said, this is a fracture, but it's not a huge fracture. So we can essentially reconnect this again and make it a stronghold. But we need to identify what would trap them, what would keep bears in there, right? Okay, well, we have some apiaries, right? They're out in the middle of these fields. Oh, we got, cranberries. The cranberry commercial operation also has a blueberry operation that goes with it. We also just have some residential trees, and you'll see some electric fencing around here, but certainly not of the quality that's going to deter any grizzly bear, right? But I want to move them. I want to move them down here, and I want to move them across this line. So I need to manage these. So I'm thinking about this. How can we do it? I could come up with a 2-corridor design. The first one's called the Oxbow Lake Corridor, and that's going to move bears north-south. So allow them to move from Tankwell down and over to the Squamish Lillooet. Then I come up with another design called the Camelback Corridor. It runs along the base of the mountain ridges. Essentially, you would say east-west, but it kind of cuts down south. So I'm saying here southwest, right? And I go in there on-site evaluation. This is what it looks like when you're coming down here. These are properties, okay? This is Oxbow Lake right here, right? And these ones that I've highlighted in blue are ones I'm suggesting be purchased if possible. If these properties come up, they're like a linchpin in keeping this connectivity and this corridor design together and keeping bears too. And I want to take them off the mountain down here. This is a wetland protected area because it's the Oxbow Lake. Across here, and this is all in between here, in between these two red lines, is a protected area to protect what's called the salmon slough, this habitat going on in here. So I want to move bears through here, skirt them along the side of this person's property, the salmon slough, and connect them up to this camelback corridor that I've got running along the back of the ridges, or essentially the back of all of these people's property. Okay, and this is the corridor design. And at the time, Michelle wasn't available to run the connectivity modeling. So we came up with a design and we were running with it until she was available, but eventually she was available and she actually ran this. So this is the scale, this is the property value modeling for purchasing things. And sure enough, when you run the whole area, she showed you the fractional area, this is Pemberton Meadows. Where does it come up on your highest connectivity value? We need to keep that. It's done for property purchases and it's to make the area safe, right? So we don't have leaking grain silos in here. We can restore it to safe habitat, restore it to safe passage for these animals. And it's predicting the same thing I'm seeing on the ground, on this boots on the ground. So here's what it looks like. We're going to come down, we're going to hit Oxbow Lake, and we're going to follow the salmon slough, okay? And we're going to link across. But it has to be safe. We don't want to stick them in there. Right? This is linking right up here to coming back down the Camelback corridor. Here's the telemetry locations on top. Thank very much to Steve Rochetta and Michelle and Bruce for providing this data. Okay? But you can see here, really when you've done a lot of modeling, even without the modeling, you can kind of predict what it's going to say and where it's going to go when you just look at telemetry locations, which they allowed me to do. So we have these 2 corridor designs and we're hoping for some property purchases along in here. And Michelle's model predicted it again. And here's the linkage showing the exact same areas like I came up with, exactly running along the Camelback, moving down and running through. So it's really well. What we're seeing on the ground is exactly what we're doing. Here's a look at the Camelback corridor for you. What's really interesting about the Camelback corridor, it runs all the way down to the Ryan River. NCC has purchased a property from the Millers in there. We will show you where that is. And Steve Rochetta considered this a grizzly bear nursery. This is when I talked with him, what he called it to me. He said, it's just such an important area down here in the Ryan, okay? And this is what it looks like along this Camelback corridor. Super open, nice ease of movement in these back, as soon as you get yourself onto it, that is. And then, there's bear prints already in there. There's marked trees. There's hair on the trees. It even looks like grizzly bear hair. So I guess it used to be, I looked into it, no logging road that's growing over. You're not putting any motorized transport in there now. It used to go in for a ski race, but it's really nice for the animals to move along, okay? So we need to, yep.
Very sorry to interrupt. I just want to give you the heads up that when you're using your cursor to show us on the map, I think it's on your presenter screen. So the folks watching can't see it.
Oh, darn. Okay. Well, sorry about that. I don't know how to do it. Do you know how to make it so they can see it, or should I?
You just put it on the other screen.
Oh, I see. I put it on this screen. There we go. Oh,
Yeah.
then I can't switch. Okay. So what? Okay, thank you so much. So we want to support this, right? So we've got this design now. We need to move them safely across. We want to support it. Here's our first eFence champions. Yay, the Van Loons, just wonderful family, super conservation oriented. Also grow potatoes for the commercial industry. So here you can see here they're first installing it. This is done with Jeff Marley of Margot Supplies Leaded. He comes in to the area, so we make sure the fences are all completely properly installed, cleared, and also to teach residents how to maintain them, to keep them going, right? It's a cost sharing initiative with C2C. It was 70-30. We're offering on-site support, and this is what it looks like here, okay? This is the corridor. These are the suggested property purchases to move them up here, the upper meadow area. This is Oxbow Lake Corridor. Here's the Camelback, and we're supporting the design. You see it all coming in here, and this is down to NCC's conservation area. This is just because the line went under the blue. Oh, yeah, I'm doing it again. This is just because the line went under the blue here, but this is NCC's conservation area. We're supporting this design up here. These are the property purchases I recommended, right? So that's all coming down through there. So now, this is the eFence sharing program. I thought people might like to see this. This is how many fences have gone in. We have one resident on the list so far, a farm for 2024. So that their acreage is not yet in there, but this is protecting so far 22 acres, okay, of farmland, and protecting everything from your carrots, your chickens, pigs, right? You name it, right? The fences are going up and around there. This is what it looks like on the ground. So here we look, we got this grizzly bear family. This is the Van Loons. We thank them for allowing us to show their place. This is the eFence right here. It's protecting their carrot crops. These are their beautiful potato crops. We don't need to eFence them because the bears, similar to us, they don't like not cooked potatoes. You can't eat those, right? But here's what it looks like because they're going to be in these fields, right? Because this is spring green-up. This is what they're eating. So this is trying to protect that design and to keep this mother and her cubs safe. Now we're not only ending there, we're targeting our education. Okay, so we're not just giving out a pamphlet on, keep lock up your garbage, that. No, this pamphlet it's made, it's targeted, it's the results of your bear hazard assessment, and it's saying here's what's going on in your community, right? And here's what we found, and here's why we're asking for this coexistence, right? And we support that. Now, don't forget, I was there in 2019. Unfortunately, the pandemic happened. We were all locked down. I couldn't get back in there. Well, as soon as I could get back in there in 2022, we held a resident meeting here. We presented the results of the hazard assessment. We talked with everybody on the ground. We told them about the electric fence program because fences hadn't gone in yet. And can they sign up? Now, as the grizzly bear started to come back, we haven't walked away, right? Here, Bruce McLellan came back, held another community meeting. Everybody's in a circle where they can share what's going on. How do we support you in this recovery? You're living in the recovery zone, right? We're not dropping you. So here's the trappings of success. Here's what starts to happen, okay? Now, up to this year in 2023, they count up to 8 bears at one time visible in the meadows, right? So some of the residents start saying, oh my God, well, now we're actually like it's happened, right? And so here's a quote: coexistence is nerve-wracking and potentially dangerous. Residents do not feel that they should shoulder the full burden of coexistence, nor should they shoulder the full burden of coexistence. For those who don't actually, live in grizzly bear country, let me just show you what this looks like. Okay, so That's showing you, that's what coexistence looks like. These people are literally living with grizzly bears in their backyard, okay? And support is needed for them, right? So we said, we need these bears. We need these bears because they need to go out. They need to be healthy. They need to be safe. We don't want problem bears going out. These bears need to keep them healthy, keep them safe, and allow them to move. Demographic rescue, allow them to help rescue their neighbors, their cousins, right? And do this naturally, because coexistence is a big thing to challenge to take on. And here's another thing that happens when we start to get this, all these bears coming back. Now they're faced with a bear viewing company in Whistler. Here's about this. They start bringing van loads of people multiple times a day to the meadows to sit outside these people's farmlands and look with binoculars on them, particularly on this female here and her 2 cubs of the year, right? And so not only are the residents having to put up with this, I'm super concerned as a biologist, because the habituation level of all these people getting out of their vehicles, viewing her day after day after day, the bear's becoming more and more habituated. She's just nursing in front of these people. Now, what happens with habituation? They can start those boundaries. Who pays for that? The people that are coexisting with her, the people with her, right? So we need to get out there. Now, I'll tell you, it was the Loite Nation that helped me here. And it was the nation who I went to and said, this is a problem, that ended up getting this stopped, right? It takes everyone. And so thanks to the nation for that. Unfortunately, a large amount of habituation had already happened by this point. So now let's go back quickly. Let's take a look. Remember I said there was 3 reports in 15 years? Now I'm going to look at the next 5 years, 2019, 20 to 2023. These are the reports last year. These are individual reports. After I remove all repeat, we have 25 calls in. Now we have bluff charge on a couple of those calls, 2 calls. Most of them are sightings. Most are just sighting the bear and just reporting it in their field and eating, right? But we have 1 approach while barbecuing, a couple livestock predations, right, going on, predation attempt, right, a vegetable garden. So these are ones we're going to try to get ahead of these areas. When's it happening now? Still highest in the fall, but every single season. And this year they're right out into the winter, right? So this coexistence piece is all year round. Right, so we have some challenges we need to face here. Everybody's got farm status. We're looking at the Wildlife Act. There's certain exemptions under the Wildlife Act that are related to agriculture. So I don't know if you can see under these grain silos, but this is actually a family of black bears, right? And when the grain silos are spilling here, and we know that this is an issue, and it's been going on for quite a while. You see here, there's years of scat here. This is an oat scat right here. Significant amount of oats. What this does is it holds her and her cubs in this area, holds them there. We need to move them through. We need to work on this. Also, another challenge is the funding of this coexistence work, okay? So the government was fabulous, set up some stuff, did some studies, and then they did these motorized access exclusion gates right at the Ryan to protect that area, and the top of Pemberton Meadows. Those are key to recovery and coming back is controlling that access in those critical areas, right? But then it seems like they walked away, because all of this coexistence works is NGOs. All of this is C2C. All of this is and so with support of the nation. But what is going on here? Like, where are these programs? These people need a bear resource officer. They need ways to help. And as this spreads and these bears go out and this demographic rescue happens, this is going to be needed throughout that whole stretch of recovery. Someone needs to be able to go in and tell those little guys, you can't be that close, and we're going to maybe give you some aversive conditioning to do it. Someone needs to be trained to do it. It needs to be a proper program, properly recorded, right? It needs to be systematic. So help is needed here. So in ending here, what I wanted to tell you is that recovery takes a village. It cannot be done in a silo. It is not one person, I will tell you that. And you cannot tell yourself, oh, these people really want it back, when you haven't done the groundwork to determine that, because you will just end up with a dead bear. Okay, it's the bears that really can pay the price, or unfortunately, maybe a human gets hurt. We can't do that. It takes a village. We all have to work together on this. So I think that our work, Michelle's and mine, and everybody else who's it's based upon, it highlights the importance of using a multi-scaled, multi-stakeholder approach for long-term coexistence. We have to work together. I want to leave you with a quote from a colleague of mine who had this written down. I just want to say it here. If habitat connectivity is one critical key to conservation in a climate changing world, human-wildlife coexistence is the currency that will help buy it. With that, I want to thank all of the wonderful people that are working to keep bears healthy and wild in the Pemberton Meadows area. Okay, it takes a village and you are a part of this village. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Oh, that was excellent. Thank you, Lana. Yeah, what a great amount of work. Thanks, everybody. There are a number of comments coming in on the chat. Please direct your questions to the Q&A function, please. Anybody who has a question can enter it there. And Marcy is going to relay those questions to Lana and Michelle. Michelle is here too. I'll pass it over to you, Marcy.
Yeah, so there's a question in the Q&A that someone asked and then sort of rescinded, but I think it's a good one in terms of looking at beyond grizzly bears. When you look at these corridors you were presenting us with, Michelle and Lana, particularly Lana, as you were zeroing in on places, can you think about it in terms of what might benefit multiple species? In some landscapes it might be caribou, but in this landscape, what else do you think is benefiting from grizzly bear habitat connectivity being restored?
Absolutely, and we did do that actually when I was trying to really sell those properties in the Upper Meadows, connecting onto the salmon slough there. So you've got your aquatic habitat, not only your salmonoids, which also have suffered in this system. You are protecting them as well, but also your amphibians, right? And your bird species as well. So there's many species that can be protected by implementing this corridor design. Thank you.
Great. Another question is, this is for Lana. Do you think the local support you found for wildlife is unique to this valley or normal, like occurring in other places maybe?
This valley has a long history. These people, a lot of them, they've been in there for decades and decades, so doing this. So in that, some senses, that is unique, right? It's not coming down, but no, I mean, you're going to get some places like Pemberton Meadows on the other sides of here, on the other sides of the fractures, that where as well, where you're working with large acreages and more agricultural communities to work with. So you're going to get that in some areas, and then you're going to get other areas which are more of the demographic rescue and a bit more difficult because they're a bit more urbanized with smaller properties. So you're going to get the whole myriad of it as you try to bring them back. But I don't know how unique.
Yeah. And Michelle, I've got a question for you. So in terms of continuing to do the genetics work to see exchange, to see sort of how these this new connectivity that's developing over these years may play out genetically, is there still research happening that you might be doing hair snagging or other ways of documenting genetic flow?
I'm not in doing that directly anymore. There is potentially work going to happen this year with McLellan Nation, but we will see where that leads. But Sequowash and Statlium communities, their biologist Cheryl Blair is leading some work in the Stein and Hadelach in particular in their traditional territory and looking. And so she might, if she's on the call, she might be a good person to ask about that. But yeah, that we have a large database going back on the genetics there. So any new movement in and out is good to identify. There have been a few community given samples from the Pemberton Portage Road fracture, and we've looked at those, but it nothing like hopefully will come, but nothing concretely planned at this time.
Okay.
For that, I'm sure, yeah.
And so someone is wondering, in terms of relocating different species to isolated areas as an option to avoid eradication, whether that's a good thing in addition to coexistence efforts.
I'll comment on that first, and then maybe Michelle can comment if she wants to. But you need to be set up for coexistence before, this is my opinion, before you're putting animals in there. So you need to make sure that you actually and truly have the majority of people that want these animals to be back in there, and you want to set them up. Because if you're just going to plunk an animal somewhere, right, and the people don't really want it there, they don't want to coexist, you will absolutely end up with a dead animal. So, I mean, I think the boots on the ground is so important, but then you can move animals.
Yeah. Okay.
I
So
can add
here-
a little bit if you
Oh,
want.
yeah.
I mean, like Lana said, it really depends on the scenario in which it's happening. I mean, it has been effective in restoring a population in the Cabinet Mountains in the United States, and also in Spain and the Pyrenees. They've restored some grizzly bear populations there. So I think if there's space for it and social support for that, then it is potential, but it is a long, expensive, and very involved program. So when it's taken with those initiatives within the context of increasing survival, I think it can be advantageous. In this case, I think trying to also support natural connectivity by supporting the growth and the survival of the neighboring populations is key and likely the long-term best case scenario for those dwindling populations now.
Okay. And then also for both of you, here's a question. What would you recommend be done or next steps to address barriers to movement between Whistler and Squamish, specifically East-West Highway 99? Any studies or plans in the work for highway mitigations?
I'll give that one to Michelle. She likes that.
Okay.
There is a group in Squamish, and sorry, the name of the program is escaping me, but that are actually working exactly on that, on increasing connectivity into the Howe Sound area. And the models that I created do expand across the whole area. So we have addressed those, it's just not in this specific presentation, and it's part of our documents that we've put out in the past. But there is, there's opportunity and space still. It's not all developed. And so I think that if local groups are going to pursue that, I think there's opportunity for it. So I can't speak exactly to what's happening, but I think that if you look at the Squamish group that's leading connectivity programs there, that's kind of part of their goal, I think. And it's not just for grizzly bears, it's a multi-species initiative.
Anything to add there, Lana? Or should I go on to the next one? Okay. So this person said maybe they missed it, but what is the largest contributor to grizzly bears dying naturally in that area?
Natural mortalities are normally very rare. So in contrast, like in Yellowstone, they had 3 or 4 documented natural mortalities in the same time that we had about that same number, but in a fraction of the size of the population. So seeing what happens to them is hard to do unless they're radio collared. So there's one, but in this case, one was a juvenile that was killed by another, or there was one bear killed by another bear is one of the more common ones. One died apparently of old age. And so which is a rare thing for a bear. Most bears, even when they live most of their life in the wilderness, do end up being killed by people. And so natural mortality is unfortunately rare, and usually it's another bear, sometimes an accident.
Okay. And I have one thing that I've been curious about, Lana. In one of your pie charts, you showed that the seasonal sightings and potential conflict, and you mentioned that a lot of that is happening in the fall and also the winter. And so I was wondering, is this habituation beginning to affect hibernation in this population? Is there sort of cohabitating, coexisting, and finding sources of food that might have them hibernating later or maybe not at all?
Yes. So yes, basically, non-natural foods are keeping them out. The grains, particularly the grain spills, are keeping them out later. Also combined with our weather. So we're having warmer winters, so they're staying out later, right? But yeah, they stayed in the meadows for an inordinately long time. Very unusual for a female with cubs of the year. So she was being reported in December, still out. So the reason, and at that time I did a little hibernation post to the Meadows group, just sort of saying, here's what keeps them out. Hibernation is a function of food availability. And if there are foods out, she will not go. But it's hard as well when we have the warming conditions that we're having. We're making the seasons longer, right? So that was in that end quote of mine, even with this climate change. It's why connectivity is so important and safe passage is so important. It's only going to get more important in a warming world for bears.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. One last question here, folks, for those that are staying on with us, and thanks for Lana and Michelle for being on a bit longer than we anticipated. But last question. So are either of you, Lana, I think you had mentioned you were working with the Nature Conservancy, but the question is, are you working with them in the Nature Conservancy or other land trusts to provide recommendations for best locations for connectivity corridors and future land acquisition?
Absolutely. I wouldn't, working in partnership with and giving them the information we found, discussing. Yes, absolutely. I've had exchanges with them. It's more a level higher than me in the C2C cog of, the people more who do that. I'm more the boots on the ground, come up with this design, here's why. So supported at that level, whereas it's more the directors, I guess, or managers that deal more on the level of C2C property purchases, but I haven't been included certainly in some discussion and development of materials for that.
Awesome. So the land trusts are part of your village, is what you're saying.
I'm trying to draw them more in.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think that's it in terms of questions and for time. So back over to you, Haley.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you. And thanks everybody who attended. We have just one more talk left in the series, amazingly. So I'm just going to pull up this last slide. Next week, we'll have Dr. Justina Ray, and she'll be presenting a talk, Context Matters, Landscape Connectivity and Ecological Integrity. So she'll be wrapping it all up. We hope to see many of you next week. Thank you very much. The recordings will be posted soon. And at the end of the series, you can all expect a survey to come out to give us some feedback on what you thought and how we might improve and what we might tackle next. Thank you so much, Lana and Michelle. Great.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.